Wanted to make sure I started the call recording right away. Good afternoon and evening, everyone. We're about 1 minute until the actual call start time, so I'll just take a minute to say hello and introduce myself to everybody just now joining us. My name is Elizabeth Warren. I'm the Communications Director for People Demanding Action and a member of this host team. We're going to be talking about TPP and the U.S. pivot to Asia today. We have some wonderful speakers and a lot of calls to action that will follow. So please stay with us for the entire call. All right, we've moved to my slide already. Getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But anyway, if you have any questions, you may notice on the screen in front of you that there is a chat feature. All you need to do is click in that lower left-hand corner just to the right of the little smiley face, type your message, hit enter, or click on send. There are folks on our host team that are monitoring the chat. We'll answer your questions, relay them to speakers, and try and get you an answer. If you want to share information with each other, you can also use that feature for that, or for sharing links. All right, we are now officially beginning, so we can start to introduce the host team and our guest speakers. I'm going to just invite my boss, Andrea Miller, to explain the technical aspects of the call and share anything that she'd like to share. Andrea?
Oh, this is going to be quick. Everybody on the phone, you're already dialed in. People that might be in the meeting room, because I'm seeing more and more people here in the meeting room, we don't use the audio, even though there is audio available in this meeting room. We use the phone so that we can record it and have really, really good quality. So the dial-in number and the PIN is on the screen. This is the normal number that we use for these calls. Now, Liz already introduced you to the chat feature. If you would like to download this PowerPoint, there is a link, www.peopledemandingaction.org/downloads/TPP. That will put you in the folder where we keep the PowerPoints from these calls. Also, at the lower right of your screen, down right below the listing of everybody that is on the call, there's a small share button. You can click on that share button and the PowerPoint is there. So have a great call, everybody, and delighted that you're all with us.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, just a quick introduction of our host team. Tom Hawking is our technical advisor. He's a member of the call planning team. He is a Move On regional organizer in the state of Pennsylvania. He is available to answer your pre- and post-call technical questions. So if you have any questions, just send him a message on the Global TPP Team Facebook page. He manages that. You can see at the bottom of the screen his address for the Global TPP Team Facebook page. Or you can send a message to us at tpp@peopledemandingaction.org, and we'll manage to get a question to Tom if you have a technical issue. All right, next slide, please. Liz Amston is a critical member of our call planning team. She's been with us since the beginning. She handles call reports, notes, and resource vetting. She's a Move On regional organizer here in Southern California. Jan Schwartzendruber is in Kansas. She's the national team co-organizer. She also works on campaign updates and sometimes edits our call notes if we have a fairly lengthy call. She's a Move On regional organizer in the state of Kansas and has been with us since the beginning, organizing on a number of issues. Mara Cohen is off today. She is also one of our key people. She normally monitors the chat and answers questions for the folks in the chat box. She's part of PDA's mass criminalization team. She leads that team. She's also a leader in the Global Climate Convergence for the state of Illinois. Next up is Lisa Oldendorf. Lisa is with us today, and she will be answering your questions in the chat box. She's a Move On regional organizer in the state of New York. Linda Brewster is part of our call planning team, and she is a Move On regional organizer in the state of Washington and has worked with us to provide speakers and assistance to the host team. Celeste Drake is part of our planning team. She's also with our partner, friend, and wonderful organization, the AFL-CIO, where she functions as Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist. Celeste typically updates us on legislative actions and updates. She's not expected to be on the call today, but she might make a surprise appearance, who knows. But we are thankful for her insights and updates. Mackenzie Wilkins is with Popular Resistance, Flush the TPP. We all know who those folks are. They've been instrumental in getting populist activists organized all over the country and working with people around the globe, in fact. Mackenzie is a climate and global trade justice activist. He is with Popular Resistance, Flush the TPP, and you can reach him at mackenzie@popularresistance.org. I'd now like to invite Mackenzie to offer an update for a couple minutes on what's happening with Popular Resistance. Mackenzie? Are you with us? Okay, I don't see you in the phone system, Mackenzie, so if you dialed in and could just put your hand up by pressing *6 on your phone, I will unmute your mic. Maybe Mackenzie has not joined us. I should ask folks, has anyone heard on the host team if Mackenzie is not going to be with us? We'll give him a minute to respond. We did start rather quickly today.
This is Harriet. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Harriet.
Yeah. I had heard that there was a possibility that Mackenzie wouldn't be joining us because he's involved in a hunger strike. So we weren't sure if he was going to be on. We thought that maybe Margaret was going to be on, but apparently Margaret couldn't make it either. So.
Okay. So we'll just say, is anyone with Popular Resistance on the call who would like to give a quick update? If not, we will just thank Popular Resistance and remind everybody that they do calls on Wednesdays, and at the end of this call, there'll be a link to register for that Wednesday call. Next up is Susie Chasnow. Susie has been mobilizing online using social media and has been carrying on the TPP Tuesday Twitter storms and also TTIP and TISA Twitter storms. Susie, you want to tell us what's going on this week?
Well, this week we're just basically dealing with the calls to action for the fall schedule of September through November, and culminating with a call to action over the mobilization in D.C. on November 14th through the 18th. So a lot of our tweets will be about that. And then they'll also be about legislative updates, anything that is in the news about TPP, as well as covering the various tentacles of the TPP and their ramifications. And you can access the tweets by going to tiny.cc/TPP Media March. And I'm sure that'll be in the chat box. And I just wanted to mention a few quick things. The Twitter storms are on Tuesday. They start at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern Time. In addition to the standard hashtags such as TPP or Stop TPP or No TPP, we've added Fall Rising, TPP Bad Deal, and Trade with the number 4 people. So Trade for people to specifically identify the fall actions. I'm a member of the TPP Media Mobilizers group, and that's where the tweets are generating from. That's an outgrowth of the Popular Resistance and Flush the TPP conference calls that have been happening. Out of those conference calls, working groups have emerged, and this is one of those working groups. And the only other thing I'd want to mention is that this really isn't a traditional Twitter storm where you have one hashtag that you're trying to get to trend. This is actually more of a concentrated messaging time when many anti-corporate rig trade coalition members and solidarity activists will be tweeting. So our goal is to send out a highly concentrated message during a concentrated period of time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Susie. And could you share some of those links and other things that you shared in the chat box for folks?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Harriet Haywood. Harriet has been my left, right, and middle hand, and basically has been leading this team, for most of the summer along with Andrea and Adam and the rest of the folks. But I'm just wanting to offer some great appreciation to Harriet for all of her hard work and mobilizing in Florida as well as national leadership. She's a co-organizer and the Move On Regional Organizer for Florida, and she's going to give an update on the Miami TTIP campaign and I think a couple other things. So Harriet, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. And hello, everyone. I'm mainly going to talk about the campaign around the TTIP ministerial. It's the 11th round of negotiations. It's happening in Miami, and that is going to be with the EU and the United States. There's like 28 countries that are involved in the TTIP ministerial, and the date on that is October 19th through the 23rd. And we're working in Florida with Deborah Dean, who is the Citizens Trade representative for the state of Florida, and she's a really great organizer down in Miami. So on Monday, October 19th, there will be an opening press conference with members of Congress. Right now, we've got Representative Alcee Hastings that has said that he would be involved in the press conference, and we're working on getting a few more representatives. We're working on asking Alan Grayson to be there as well, and also to get reps from the environmental, food, senior, and labor groups also. And the purpose, obviously, is to show that there is this great opposition to the TTIP and the TPP and all these other horrible free trade agreements right out of the box at the beginning of their meeting, and that it would be to set this tone. So we were going to do this at the hotel where they hold the meeting. Right now we don't actually have the information on the actual hotel, so we're still waiting to hear about that. And I also wanted to put in there that the Florida Alliance for Retired Americans is helping on this campaign, and they've been wonderful in Florida. They've posted the CTC news on their newsletters and other media that I've sent to them, so they're being really helpful. And the thing to remember is the negotiators are going to be holding a stakeholder day where interested parties can make 6-minute presentations. So obviously they're going to have their lobbyists, the multinational corporations and pro-trade groups will be speaking there. So what we're going to do, we're going to have our own folks lined up to speak at this meeting as well. Right now we're getting people from AFL-CIO, Global Trade Watch, Teamsters, and the Sierra Club. They're all going to be sending folks to speak. But we're also working on getting other professionals. I have a pediatrician that I organize with down in Delray Beach, so I'm working on getting her to speak at the stakeholders meeting. And I'm also working on a Florida anti-fracking speaker. So there's all kinds of great people that we're going to get. And so before the forum, we will be holding a press conference also with all those folks, and that's going to be before the actual stakeholders meeting takes place. So the second part of the day is that we really need to pack the room with supporters, and we're going to have T-shirts and signs to ensure we have a great presence there. And everyone that participates, also, if you want to participate, you do have to register. So you have to contact me, and then I will make sure that you're registered for this event. Also, we will be doing a teach-in or a People's Gala Forum. That will be the evening before at a local church down in downtown Miami, and we are planning on having some of those national speakers on a panel. So we're looking into a space and trying to build a huge crowd, and hopefully being able to get a musical act or some type of nationally recognizable personality for that event. And then if we also are hoping to have the funding to actually have a war room in the hotel, and we will have different issue briefing on each day of the forum that is during that week in October. So for every day there'll be a different issue. For example, the state report on human trafficking, and so we also have some professors that can address this issue. And the other thing to remember is that People's Global Climate March is October 14th. So we're going to participate in that, and then we're going to use that gathering also to let folks know what we're going to be doing. So the big thing is on this is to be in their face, but with an inside strategy. Now, the Citizens Trade campaign people are not necessarily going to do a big march and rally, so but that doesn't leave the option out for other people that want to do a march and rally. They're kind of feeling that the march and rally might kind of fall flat a little bit just because they're doing a big march and rally that week with the climate march. So also there is going to be, they're working on resolutions, and they're hoping to get the resolutions passed in the city of Miami and the Miami-Dade County Commission. The Florida AFL-CIO is holding their annual convention September 26th and 27th, so they're going to try to get a resolution passed there as well. And they're going to do an edit. Yeah. Okay. Let me just say one more thing. Okay. And then. Yeah, I apologize. I didn't. It is taking a long time. Okay, Friday, September. This coming Friday. That's September 18th at noon. There is a planning meeting. If anybody would like to attend, it's at the AFL-CIO Hall in Miami, and I'll put the address and the contact for Deborah Dean and Glenda in the chat box. Thank you.
Harriet. Thanks so much, Harriet.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, now I'd like to give the floor to Catherine Johnson, our partner at Public Citizen. Catherine's a field organizer for Global Trade Watch. She works to educate and mobilize constituents for national campaigns. She's previously worked as an assistant director to the Guatemalan Human Rights Commission and has been just a key organizer throughout this fight, and we're so grateful to have her on the call. Catherine?
Hi, everybody. It's always wonderful to be on here. It's great to see every week how many people are willing to take some time out of their Sunday evening to come on. It gives me so much hope that we can, keep pushing this campaign against the TPP and TISA and the TTIP and all of these horrible trade agreements that are coming up. So I want to offer some updates so far on the TPP negotiations. There's not a lot of news, which is fabulous news. What we really obviously don't want to see are breakthroughs in the negotiations that could move us forward to introduction then in all of the different domestic congresses and parliaments. So what we want to see is the negotiators continually tripping up on these issues. Some of the issues that they're trying to move forward, so they're still really wrangling over autos and auto parts, and this is negotiations that are going on especially between Japan, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Canada and Mexico have enjoyed exclusive access to, or exclusive benefits in access to the U.S. auto market and just the market in general within those three NAFTA countries. And there's a lot of debate over what percentage of a car or a car part has to be produced within a TPP member country to then get the reduced or zero level tariffs in the TPP and in the NAFTA countries. And there's been a lot of spin in the media with the U.S. trying to say that they're really advancing in these negotiations, and the rest of the country saying, no, actually they haven't really approached any sort of a deal. And so the U.S. has gone as far as to suggest that they might be able to conclude negotiations later this month, but Australia and Japan have both said, no, we really don't think that's realistic. There's still so many sticky issues. On the auto issue, we saw a letter from 3 of our allies in car-producing states send a letter to President Obama on, asking for protection for the auto industry in the U.S., and that got great coverage. Adam, I think we'll show you some of that when he's talking. There's still a lot of debate over the tariffs and the market access for sugar as well, and then for dairy as well, as Canada wants to continue to protect its very powerful and important dairy sector in Canada. And that's especially sticky for Canada as they have elections coming up next month. And so a lot of people don't think that they will give any ground on dairy access until after their elections in mid-October, which again is great news, because switching to the potential timelines in Congress, if you look at the fast-track law that was unfortunately passed in June, what it requires is once a negotiation is agreed upon and finalized, there is a 90-day period before that agreement could be introduced into Congress in the United States. And for 60 days of that, the last 60 days of those 90 days, the TPP has to be made publicly available. Then, and that is all very clearly laid out in Fast Track. If they don't follow that timeline, the TPP would be taken off of the Fast Track and then could be filibustered or it could be amended and doesn't have all of that, those Fast Track benefits that they fought so hard for. Then there's an additional 30 days after those 90 days that customarily they propose the legislation, so the TPP itself, but then also all of what's called the implementing legislation, which is the ways that we would have to change our laws to be in compliance with the TPP. And so traditionally they leave another 30 days for that to ripen, for that, as they call it, sort of rot, we could also call it. But when we looked at the legislation, there's no mechanism that would punish them if they didn't leave those last 30 days. So the very shortest time period under law that they could get away with would be 90 days. And the last possible moment that they could pass it this year would be Christmas Eve, which would be outrageous, but theoretically they could. Which means that when we pass September 24th, that's 90 days before Christmas Eve, we are absolutely set. No, it won't go to Congress this year. And we're basically at that point already. It's very, very, very unlikely they would bring legislation this year to Congress, but still theoretically possible. And obviously we cannot trust this negotiation to follow the rules, as they've shown that they're not willing to when it comes to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So a couple of things that you'll see coming up are some more congressional letters on the other sticky issues on dairy and textiles, clothes and things like that, and sugar is trying to protect members of Congress trying to protect those markets in the U.S. and protect our workers here, and hopefully throw a little sand in the gears. And then the other sneaky thing that they could possibly do is they could announce that they have a deal when they don't really have it. And the only way that they would be able to get away with that is by making this process even less transparent than it already is. And with that, actually, you could switch to the next slide. This is the USTR's level of transparency, which is at absolutely zero. And a couple of recent examples. First of all, in the Fast Track law, there was a requirement that the administration had to put forward a czar of transparency. And who they have appointed as the czar of transparency is actually the general counsel for the U.S. trade representative. So the person whose job it is, theoretically, to make sure that we have access and we can see and this process is all transparent is also the same person that's supposed to legally advise USTR on how to make it less transparent and what they can legally do and what they can legally get away with. And so it's a complete conflict of interest and just shows the complete lack of political will. The other thing they've done is after the Maui negotiations, the round in Maui that ended at the end of July, they were supposed to place, there's a secret basement room where members of Congress can see the TPP text with only clearance, with only staffers that have security clearance. And they can't take notes in, they can't take their cell phones in, they can't tell anybody what they read there. But at least they're able to see the text. But since the Maui round of negotiations, the new text hasn't been placed in that room. Unfortunately, we have some members of Congress who follow this really closely and know the TPP and so have raised a stink about this and will continue to. But so theoretically, when the U.S. says that we could reach an agreement later this month, what they could say, especially around the United Nations General Assembly meetings, which start on the 18th, at the very end of September, they could say we've reached an agreement, but then never actually put the text forward, not make it even available to Congress until they, theoretically do reach it. So it's important to continue to push for transparency in the process so that they don't get away with that. But at this point, it is almost for sure that it will be, that we won't see anything before Congress until probably even after Super Tuesday, which is when the Chamber of Commerce, which is of course one of the big forces behind the TPP, says that they would like to see it put forward so it doesn't interfere with the early presidential primaries in the United States, which gives us so much time to continue doing education and outreach and bringing in more people and doing things like all of the mobilization around the TTIP negotiations in Miami, which I'm really excited about, doing things around the UN General Assembly meetings, which there's lots of activists up in New York who are doing things around that, and just reach bigger audiences and make sure that the public is really aware of what's going on and pull more people in. And I just want to compliment everybody who's been involved in this, and it's really all of this organizing that's pushed it to this point, and shows the fruit of our fight against fast track. Even if we lost that particular fight, it's helping us win the overall war. So with that, I will open it up to questions. If there's any, do we have enough time, or did I use all of that?
Let's see. We got about 4 minutes, and maybe if Bernadette will let you have a minute 5. So press *6 on your phone if you have a quick question for Catherine Johnson with Public Citizen. We'll try and get at least one question in. First come, first serve, folks. *6 on your phone if you'd like to ask Catherine a question.
Hi.
Okay, Dean Edwards, go ahead.
No, this is me, Stephen Costes of New York City.
Okay, all right. You came in as Dean Edwards, so welcome. Go ahead.
I know all this stuff is happening in Miami, but are there any solidarity things we can do in the New York, New Jersey area, or should we all come down?
Can I jump in real quick, Catherine? Adam Weissman is going to be on the call later on in just a little while. He's with Trade Justice in New York, and we'll be telling you about a ton of things happening there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I want to get one more question in for Catherine. Go ahead. Area code 906-399-7999.
Yes, hello. This is Mark Haslund up in Upper Michigan. Catherine, I asked you online there if it's possible that they could change a law to circumvent everything that fast track right now if they were afraid that it was going to fail after the first of the year. Could they? If they could, I think they would. What are your thoughts?
I don't think they want any more fights than they have to have. Getting fast track passed in the first place was a huge fight and is actually going to mean big political blows to some of those Democrats that voted for it. And so the last thing they want is an additional one before the TPP would go to a vote. And so what I think would be more likely is that sort of some of the ways that I was just talking about, that they would fudge on the laws under fast track. I mean, fast track already tips everything to their advantage. That we don't have any filibuster. There's no ability to filibuster it. There's no ability to amend it in any way to take out some of these worst pieces of it. And, the timeline, the short timeline in which they would actually have to vote on it. And so I think that it's more likely that they will just wait until the exact moment that they think that they can get it through, sort of like they did with fast track. They waited for that one day when they could, everybody was in the right mood to vote for it, and then bring it to a vote right then. And unfortunately, that's what they'll be able to do once, if and when they finish the negotiations. That's still not a guaranteed thing, I should point out. But no, I don't think that they would amend the fast track bill or pass another similar fast track bill. It already makes it that so easy to pass trade agreements.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I know you have to be on another call at 8 o'clock, so thank you so much for the update and for sharing everything. Is there anything else you'd like to share before you sign off?
Not at all. And my email was there on the slide, so if anybody does have other questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you to all of you.
All right. I'm going to clear the queue. Just speaker comes up, we will know who's new. I'm going to ask my boss, Andrew Miller, to advance the slide for us. I can introduce our main guest speaker, Bernadette Ellered, chairperson with Buy-In USA, a founding member of the organization. She has served as Northeast Regional Coordinator since 2007 and chairperson up till the present. And I'm just going to ask for Bernadette to let us know when you would like us to advance your slides. Just say next slide, please. Welcome, Bernadette. Okay, I think we've advanced 2 slides, Andrea, by accident. And I'm not hearing Bernadette. All right, Bernadette, if for some reason you have been muted, could you press *6 on your phone and I will unmute your mic? So I know you're in the meeting room. So.
Can people hear me?
I can hear you. There we go. All right. Did you want us to go back a slide to the first one, or is this the first one?
No, that's the first slide. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
You're welcome. All right. So just let us know when to advance, and welcome to the call.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and good afternoon for some. Thank you for inviting me to share information with you today. It's very, very timely and very, very important for the future of our world. I was asked to share about the so-called Asia pivot and U.S. geopolitical strategy in Asia and the people's response. And by the people's response, I mean the people in the Asia-Pacific region's response. As I was introduced, I am with Buy-In USA. That's our website there on the slide. We are an alliance of 20 grassroots organizations representing Filipino workers, students, youth, women, cultural workers, and human rights advocates based in the U.S. And we are a chapter, an overseas chapter of an even bigger alliance in the Philippines that is very, very active in struggling for social change and national liberation of the Philippines, and also engages in alliance work with other Asian countries in the region, particularly around neoliberalism and militarism led by the United States. So the second slide here, I'm going to talk about the pivot really quick, or the so-called pivot. So the word pivot actually came up for the first time in October 11, 2011. It was written by, there was an article on Foreign Policy magazine written by Hillary Clinton, who was, back then was still the Secretary of State. And the article, the op-ed, I should say, is entitled America's Pacific Century. And if you can see from the subheader, it says the future of politics will be decided in Asia, not Afghanistan or Iraq. And the U.S. will be right at the center of the action. And I don't know who here is familiar with this article, but it's actually a very, very long article, and I actually encourage you to read it when you get a chance. It's available online, and it goes at length about why America has to, quote-unquote, pivot to Asia from the Middle East, and by Asia, meaning the Asia-Pacific region, talking about for purposes of economic growth, for seizing markets, for investments, for diplomacy, and for defense and security. That's the rhetoric that was used in this particular article. So next slide. So the following, just a few months after that article came out, there was a big press conference at the Pentagon, and President Obama, and you see to his side is Leon Panetta, who was the defense secretary, actually held a press conference announcing a new defense strategy that stresses Asia. And in this defense strategy, the Obama administration announced that it was going to rebalance its 60% of its naval forces towards the Asia-Pacific region, meaning it was going to increase its military presence in the Asia-Pacific region. I'll just read these quotes. We'll be strengthening our presence in the Asia-Pacific, and budget reductions will not come at the expense of this critical region. We're going to continue investing in our critical partnerships and alliances. I think it's important for all Americans to remember over the past 10 years, since 9/11, our defense budget grew at an extraordinary pace. Over the next 10 years, the growth in the defense budget will slow, but the fact of the matter is this: it will still grow because we have global responsibilities that demand our leadership. Okay, so next slide. So the next slide here, so it says here, what's new about U.S. military intervention in the Asia-Pacific region? And these are all historical photographs from over the past 60 years that basically illustrates how the U.S. has always been in the Asia-Pacific region militarily. And so you see here, these are pictures from Vietnam, from South Korea, from Japan, I believe. And the Philippines. So there's really, it's not a pivot. To use the word pivot is really deceiving and makes people think that, you know, the U.S. military was never in the region. When in fact, next slide, please. When in fact the largest global command of the U.S. military is in the Pacific region. So right there, see here, the Pacific Command is the oldest and largest of the 6 current regional commands of the U.S. military, the others being Africa, Northern, European, Central, and the Southern commands. And it was formed during the dawn of the Cold War in 1947. So its area of responsibility takes over 50% of the world. And you see all those, the scope of the geographical scope. And in terms of the troops, there's at least 300,000 troops of all branches of the armed forces that are there. And it not only manages the installations, but also the treaties, the military treaties with Australia, Japan, New Zealand, the Philippines, and South Korea. So again, for those of us who are from the region, for those of us from the Philippines, neoliberalism has always meant militarism. And so those things go hand in hand. Next slide. So the geopolitical role of U.S. military bases historically is in order to protect and defend U.S. strategic interests and hegemony throughout the world. The U.S. and its allies have established control over strategic straits or choke points around the world. These choke points control the economic lifeblood of the world, the shipping lanes where commerce and trade of the world, and the naval warships that protect such interests and commerce of the major powers pass. The deployment of overseas U.S. bases globally is intended, among others, to provide protection and defense of these strategic straits. So notice, we're not defending the nations or the people. We're defending the shipping lanes of where trade goes through. So, next slide. So again, I mentioned earlier that this is another side of neoliberal economic policies. The U.S. economy is largely dependent on the Pacific Rim, particularly because of its export position. So the Asia-Pacific region is the largest U.S. export market. In 2010-21, economies that make up APEC, or Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, accounted for 60% of all U.S. exports, and that's worth $775 billion, and 37% of private services exports, and that's worth roughly $205 billion. China's rapidly expanding economic influence over the region poses a major threat to the U.S. economic dominance over the region, though China does not flex its military might or saber rattle to broaden its commercial influence over the region. So this slide is a little bit dated. Over the past year or so, we actually have seen China flex its military might and saber rattle in the region. So that will be updated because they are aggressively building their military forces with military installations in the South China Sea. That has already gotten to some clashes with neighboring countries. Obama's push for the TPP agreement that outlines a U.S.-dominated free trade zone in the region, and of course we say free trade zone with quotes because it's really it's not free, nor is it really about trade. Next slide. So I mentioned the South China Sea, and I think that's critical because the South China Sea is an area that's very, very strategic to U.S. interests in the fact that it's a source of many, many natural wealth, especially oil. There are deep oil reserves, and there are also deep deposits of natural gas all throughout the South China Sea. The South China Sea is also the South China Sea is also a very, very diverse in marine life, and so you can see it's very, very crucial to the ecosystem, the world ecosystem, in terms of biodiversity. It's also it's making it a very significant body of water in the geopolitical sense. 50% of the world's annual fleet tonnage passes through the straits in the South China Sea, and that includes carrying approximately 2 million barrels of crude oil daily. And I mentioned earlier, 1/3 of all marine biodiversity is in the South China Sea in the world. So that's also why it's very, very crucial and critical to commerce. Next slide. So I mentioned the commercial shipping lanes. So you can see here some of the main ones are the Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Lombok, and the Sunda Strait. These are where 50% of the world's annual tonnage passes through, fleet tonnage passes through these straits. So that's why the South China Sea is very, very much disputed right now. Amongst the countries in the region, there are territorial disputes happening, and the U.S. is also engaging. The U.S. military is also engaging in these disputes, just to be clear, and that's why it's justifying its military presence in the region, and somehow using the rhetoric of defense against China, in particular, to justify its increased presence, its escalation of geopolitical strategy in the region. So next slide, please. So one of the other reasons why the Asia-Pacific region is very, very important is because it is home to over 60% of the world's population. And what that means is that it is, as a region, it's the largest source of human labor, of human resources, of labor. And at the same time, what that basically translates to is many countries in the Asia-Pacific region, especially the Philippines, implement labor export programs that are basically imposed through neoliberal economic policies, and also many of the jobs that are created, quote unquote, out of from industries or companies that set up their production operations in the Asia-Pacific region are very, very flexible jobs. So there's very, very aggressive labor flexibilization. And what that basically means is that the jobs are very, very insecure, precarious, and dangerous, deregulated, and contractualized. So, and workers' rights are basically, there's no such thing as workers' rights, for many of these workers in the region that are working for big multinational companies that set up operations, including U.S. companies that set up operations in countries in the Asia-Pacific region. We mentioned trafficking earlier. Labor export programs basically facilitate human trafficking. So when free trade agreements or so-called free trade agreements like the TPP, which is the economic centerpiece right now of the pivot, when they're implemented, that's basically going to translate to increased human trafficking because of the aggressive labor export and flexibilization. Countries like the Philippines, for example, our economy is import dependent and import dependent and export oriented. So in other words, we don't have the Philippines in particular doesn't have stable national industries, or any national industries for that matter, that can basically create jobs and create and produce goods that we can live off of and offer the people sustenance. So we live off of giving away our people, and we live off of giving away our resources, our natural wealth. Next slide. So I mentioned the natural wealth. So mining is a very, very big problem in countries like the Philippines and in other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. These pictures are from the Philippines. They're from Mindanao, which is in the southern Philippines. Mindanao, the Caraga region of Mindanao is the mining capital of Asia. So you see here the mountains are bare and there are no more trees. A lot of these operations are also illegally conducted, meaning by big multinational corporations do conduct land grabs, and they do conduct illegal extractive operations. When we say illegal, meaning they're not really processed in a legitimate way. Unfortunately, in the Philippine government's practice is that they allow it. They turn a blind eye to this. So, and a lot of communities live off of the land. So, in other parts of the Asia Pacific region, it's a food belt, and so a large part of the communities live off agriculture and off the land. So, next slide, please. So this leads to a food crisis and many other types of crises. But in the Philippines, we for many years we prided ourselves for being the #1 producer of rice to the whole region. Now we have to import rice because we don't produce rice anymore, as much rice as we can anymore, because of the imposition of these trade agreements that basically dictate what crops need to be grown, and when these crops that are grown to the dictates of big multinational corporations, they change the soil, so the soil doesn't produce as much as it did before. Another crisis that I didn't touch upon is the climate crisis is very much linked to this. People know that almost 2 years ago, there was a big typhoon that ravaged through the Philippines and killed many people. And the fact of the matter is that typhoons don't necessarily kill people. What kills people are the flash floods and the force coming from these floods. The reason why there are flash floods in the Philippines is because the mountains are bare, because there are no more trees. These trees act as natural barriers from floods, to prevent floods. But when there are no more trees, when there are no more mountains, then communities die. People are killed when these typhoons pass through. Okay, next slide, please. So all of this translates to people's movements in the region. Again, this is not just happening in the Philippines. What I just shared about the conditions in the Philippines is happening all over the Asia-Pacific region. Also, especially in South Asia as well, and Southeast Asia, where the population is largely rural and lives off of agricultural production. So we see decades and decades of people's resistance. In countries that are more or less industrialized, there are very, very, very vibrant workers' movements. In countries where that are more or less predominantly agricultural and rural, there are very, very strong peasant and farmer movements. And in countries like the Philippines and throughout South Asia, there are armed revolutions happening, to resist and also to defeat these large multinational corporations that are setting up operations in the territories. Next slide. So when there is much resistance and people's movements happening, in the case of the Asia-Pacific region, for almost 100 years, people have been resisting U.S. presence, U.S. imperialism in the region, because the U.S. imperialism was born when they expanded to the Philippines back in 1896, 1898, when the Philippine-American War started. So ever since that period, ever since 1898, the U.S. has had to develop counterinsurgency tactics and wage counterinsurgency in the region. Again, this is really integral to neoliberal economic policies, is the counterinsurgency and the military installations. So counterinsurgency, of course, for those who may not be familiar, in the Asia-Pacific region, that basically means the emergence of proxy armies that do the dirty work for the U.S. military. In other words, the U.S. military is not the one necessarily engaged in defeating resistance movements or insurgents, as they term them. They basically prop up and support militaries, state militaries, to do the dirty work for them. So there are many quote-unquote dirty wars that are happening all throughout the Asia-Pacific region, especially in areas like in India and in the Philippines, where there are very, very vibrant armed struggles raging on. Next slide. So last year, just everyone knows, the Philippines is not currently party to the TPP, but the Aquino government, President Aquino, has gone on record to say that he wants to join the TPP. He wants the Philippines to join the TPP, and so has Obama. Obama has also gone on record saying that he would like the Philippines to join the TPP. So last April of last year, President Obama went on tour to Asia, and it was a visit that included a trip to the Philippines. So we're assuming to discuss how to make possible the Philippines joining the TPP. The fact is that the Philippines can't just join the TPP, even though the president already stated it, and that's because of provisions in the Philippine Constitution that basically prohibit or basically limit the percentage of foreign ownership of land and other types of assets and investments in the region, in the country. So if the Philippines were to join the TPP, these provisions would have to be lifted, or there would have to be a charter change. Next slide, please. So when Obama visited the Philippines, this was happening outside of the palace. This is an effigy, and there were massive protest demonstrations. If you see the effigy in the upper left, that's basically President Obama, and the dog that he is walking is President Aquino. So that's basically illustrates the relationship between the Philippines and the U.S. The Philippines, was a former colony of the U.S. and is now a neo-colony of the U.S. So everything I described about being a dumping grounds for surplus goods, for surplus exports, and being a source of cheap raw materials and of cheap labor, these are all the features of a neo-colony. Or at least an economy that is not sovereign. And not even our political system is sovereign. We're very, very heavily dominated by U.S. interests. So you see right outside, yeah, you're right, this wasn't in the mainstream press at all. So the effigy was burned to the ground. So there's a very, very strong anti-imperialist movement in the Philippines, especially in the urban centers as well. In Manila, there's a very, very strong street demonstration movement. And even within the Philippine Congress, there is a strong opposition bloc that's very much aligned with what we call the Parliament of the Streets, the street movement, the protest movement, that also challenges many, many policies that the Philippine government puts out, because the Philippine government, all Philippine presidents have been more or less what we call U.S. puppets, meaning they've been completely dominated by U.S. interests. Okay. Next slide. So you see here, this is a massive mobilization coming from Kilusan Magbubukid ng Pilipinas, or KMP as we say. Kilusan Magbubukid ng Pilipinas translates to National Peasant Movement of the Philippines, because the majority of Filipinos in the country are peasants and or farm workers, and so the charter, so they're here protesting charter change in Manila. So mainly what people do in the Philippines is when the peasants mobilize, they walk, they literally walk from their regions to Manila to the palace to protest. So it says here, noted charter change. Like I said, the charter change, when the Aquino government pushes for a charter change, or when the next administration pushes for a charter change, because Aquino is up, the presidency is up for re-election next year, this would basically allow for the Philippines to join the TPP, and also for greater foreign investment, which currently is limited because of provisions in the Philippine Constitution. And certainly the peasants, their interest is not to have 100% foreign ownership of the land. So I said earlier when I showed the slides of the mining operations, that many of this is done illegally. It's done illegally precisely because the Constitution prohibits that from happening. Okay, next slide. So the conclusion here is the U.S. government's so-called rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region is nothing new to APIs, or Asia-Pacific Islanders. The U.S. government, through its imperialist wars of aggression in the region throughout the 20th century, laid the groundwork and developed infrastructure for total economic, political, and military hegemony over the last 70 years. This includes puppet regimes and agents of local reaction throughout the region, including proxy military forces. Quote, rebalance simply means deploying more U.S. troops and public funds towards beefing up existing structures of reactionary violence in the region, including realigning the loyalties of U.S. puppets local agents and allies in the region, as well as provoke military antagonism to boost the U.S. military-industrial complex. The U.S. government's policy over China is one of engagement and containment. Engagement as a major commercial partner and market for U.S. corporate interests, and containment as a major economic super rival. There are raging people's democratic movements for national and social liberation throughout the region that threaten U.S. strategic interests. Next slide. So these pictures are back from 2012, shortly after the press conference at the Pentagon. Biden USA mobilized in Chicago when NATO was meeting there, and we protested this so-called pivot or this escalation of geopolitical strategy in the Asia-Pacific region. So these are some of our pictures. And so Biden USA, ever since that announcement, this has been a main campaign for us, and we also we're happy to also join forces with many other activists out there who are working to educate and organize around the TPP, around neoliberalism, here in the U.S. and in other parts, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. We're part of many international alliances for migrants, for students, for workers, for youth, and for women that speak to these issues. We're also happy to have formed a coalition locally in New York called Asia Pacific Islander People Solidarity, and the purpose of this group is to really talk about build Asia and U.S. solidarity, people solidarity, because in Asia, like I said earlier, these people are not just sitting down letting this happen. They've been fighting for 100 years in the region, and these struggles are not covered in the media, like someone mentioned. So we want to build more people-to-people solidarity between those of us here who are struggling against neoliberalism and free trade agreements, and those in the region who are really launching life and death struggles against these policies. So there has to be more North and South solidarity, people-to-people solidarity. And there has to be support for these struggles as well in the Asia-Pacific region, which in our view is decisive. It's very, very decisive in defeating these policies. Next slide. So this is more pictures of our solidarity work. So we're part of this global alliance called the International League of People Struggles, or the ILPS for short. So the picture on the upper left is ILPS chapter in Indonesia. The picture on the bottom right is an ILPS International Gathering Assembly in Manila back in 2011. And the ILPS is going to be meeting again in Manila in November, and everyone here is welcome to join us in Manila. I will be there. We're going to be discussing people's struggles in the region, and also just wanting to connect with activists from the U.S. So if there are free trade activists from this call or those from our circles who would be interested in going, you are all invited. Just go to ilps.info for more information. I can also send more information through the Trade Justice listserv. Next slide. Next slide. So for those who may or may not be aware, one of our campaigns right now is around the UN Development Summit that's taking place in New York City later this month. The weekend of September 26th is the UN Development Summit. So heads of states are going to be gathering at the UN headquarters in New York to discuss the outcomes of their so-called Millennium Development Goals. So people are familiar with the MDGs. The MDGs are more or less these list of goals that the UN put together announced in the year 2000 to basically, and purports that the U.S. is genuine in pursuing these goals, which include like eradicating poverty, stopping hunger. Ironic because none of these things happened over the course of the 15 years. And yet at the same time, these governments are going to declare that their MDG campaign was a success, that they achieved these things, that they achieved these benchmarks that they set for themselves. When in fact the whole thing is a Trojan horse for greater neoliberal economic policies. It's sugarcoating basically. So we know in the regions that that poverty has gotten worse, that hunger has deepened, that many people have died, that many more families have been broken up, and that many more migrants and people have been trafficked. So nothing has gotten better. Everything has gotten worse. So here in New York City, we're part of a network called Campaign for People's Goals, and this campaign is an education campaign around development justice. So if people can go on peoplesgoals.org to learn more about the campaign and sort of our platform for development justice. So through the Campaign for People's Goals for Sustainable Development, we are organizing days of action for justice and system change at the same time as the UN Development Summit is happening. So these are the dates. On the 24th, we are having a Speak Out for Climate Justice. This is the day that the Pope Francis is supposed to arrive in New York City. So we are joining a major vigil at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza that evening to welcome him after our Speak Out for Climate Justice in front of the Mid-Manhattan Public Library on 5th Avenue and 40th Street. So we're having that first, and then we're going to process to the vigil at Dag Hammarskjöld to join the main vigil led by which is interfaith and also civil society led. And then folks know, for those who may or may not be familiar, Pope Francis came out with an encyclical this year that has very strong pronouncements around climate justice, and with very strong in the context of economic justice. So many people are happy about these pronouncements, and that's why we wanted to make sure that that message is also continues on with individual as well. That those pronouncements aren't lost, especially when the Pope addresses the UN the following morning, the following Saturday morning, when he addresses the Development Summit. The following day, on the 26th, we're going to be having a march against forced migration and development at Washington Square Park. That is wrong when it says by the fountain. It's actually by the arch now, not by the fountain. So we're going to have a rally, and right before this is not in this flyer, but right before this march, there is a People's Tribunal happening at NYU, and that tribunal is an international tribunal of conscience on human rights, immigrant justice, and U.S. foreign policy's impact on Mexico and Central America. So that conference, that tribunal ends at 5 o'clock. So right after that, they're going to join us in Washington Square Park, and they're going to rally with us, because we basically want to, as the UN is meeting, we want to basically bring migrants and refugees together to talk about how neoliberalism is at the root of why people are displaced, why people have to leave. We call it forced migration because migrants, in the age of neoliberalism, migrants don't migrate by choice. They migrate in search of work because their own home countries can't provide work anymore. And under labor export policies, they're actually conditioned in the education system to leave their countries to service, to provide their services in other countries. And
hey, Bernadette, I apologize for cutting you off, but we are about 10 minutes behind schedule. So we're going to need to move on to Adam Weissman so that we have time for him to get his in. This has been a riveting conversation, and anything that you want to share with the group, if you could just drop it into the chat or send an email to either Adam or Andrea or Harriet or me, and we'll make sure that that information gets passed on to everybody so that they don't miss anything.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we all learned an awful lot today that we didn't know before. So, all right. So I'm going to ask Andrea to advance to Adam Weissman. And Adam has a lot to share with us and is going to move very quickly today so that we can get Mackenzie Wilkins in, who has joined us and will fill us in on some of the stuff happening with Popular Resistance at the end of the call. So, Adam, you are up. And Andrea, if you could just advance the slide for us. Maybe mine's not moving. I'm not sure if other people's is or not either. Let's see. Well, Adam, if you want to get queued up, I know you're probably on.
My internet connection is dying, so it's my internet. I'm going to try to get it back without collapsing the room.
Okay. All right.
I can start. I mean, people won't have the headlines in front of them, but I can just start talking in the interest of time, and then when the headlines get there, they'll get there. If that's helpful.
Okay, we can do that. And what we'll let everyone know is if you.
Or should we just have Mackenzie go and then, or I don't know what do you think makes most sense?
Well, here's what I'd like to do, folks. Andrea's got it working. I think she's got it moving.
Oh, great.
I see the slides advancing. There we go. Andrea's got it rolling. That's
Excellent.
My boss. Okay. All right, Adam, you are up, and just let her know when to advance your slides.
Okay, yeah, you can let's skip right ahead because we got to move. So. On to the next slide. So I'm going to start by mentioning a few other events that will also be going on during that period in New York City when that Bernadette was talking about. First of all, it looks like they're getting cut off, unfortunately, but first of all, just every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern, there's a internet radio program you can tune into called Event Horizons, where I'm a weekly guest giving updates on many of the issues that we talk about here, so please join us every Thursday. But in particular, so the Twitter storm on Tuesday the 22nd that Susie will be updating us about next week is going to be specifically focused on promoting the Global Days of Justice and System Change that Bernadette is talking about. So that's Tuesday the 22nd at 9 p.m. And this, also that week, Event Horizons, which I just mentioned, is going to be doing a special focus program on the Sustainable Development Goals Summit and the Global Days of Action. Again, that's Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Next slide, please. Okay, and a couple other events that are going to be going on during the mobilization. On Friday evening, September 25th, the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is the nation's largest food co-op, they've just recently launched an international trade education squad, and they are going to be having a forum on the free trade agreements that we're fighting, looking at issues like the investor-state dispute settlement, how TTIP could threaten and TPP could threaten GMO bans, and many of the other issues that are of concern to us. Also, starting that evening and running into Saturday, there's going to be an International Tribunal of Conscience on Human Rights, Immigrant Justice, and the impact of U.S. policy in Mexico and Central America, which will be looking heavily at the destructive impacts of NAFTA and CAFTA-DR, the Central America Dominican Republic Free Trade Agreement, on the people of Mexico and Central America. Next slide. Okay, what's next is just a few quick news updates. Starting out at the beginning, one thing we should know directly connected to what Bernadette has just told us, the UN has released a report directly related to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is neutral on trade. It has failed to make the very clear point that the goal of sustainable development, as opposed to a corporate-dominated model, is being undermined by this model of unfair corporate trade. We already heard a little bit from Catherine about the issues around auto parts and TPP, and about how the potential of a cabinet-level meeting this month on TPP. There's talk about doing a summit, doing a meeting in New York during this during the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. But as Catherine said, it's quite questionable whether that's going to happen with pushback from countries like Australia. Next slide. Japan apparently now supports Taiwan joining TPP. Again, more on the auto issue. Vietnam is apparently committing to labor reforms in TPP. We heard a little bit about the transparency chief. Next slide. Okay, and so the U.S. delegation is pushing strongly for market access in Japan for U.S. meat industry exports. These are the products of major industrial producers. This is not small family farms. This is industrial meat, the factory farm, intensive agriculture interests who are trying to dominate the global export market and capture the Japanese market in competition with Europe. TPP resistance is growing in New Zealand. Activists have occupied one of the Prime Minister's offices in opposition to TPP. Next slide. In Germany, the Bundestag is angry because the Bundestag members are not being given access to the TTIP text. The texts are being shared with government officials, but not with the elected members of their legislature. Meanwhile, activists in Europe are angry about the fast-track commitment towards pushing as one of the major goals of TTIP efforts to suppress European countries participating in boycott, divestment, and sanctions efforts to support human rights in Palestine. There's a growing movement in Europe, similar to the movement that we've heard about Nancy and others here for TPP-free zones. There's a growing movement for TTIP-free zones in Europe. Next slide. We've been hearing a bit about how the promise of improved transparency in TTIP, apparently in reality things are moving in just the opposite direction. The European Commission has now announced that they will not be sending updates to TTIP to the closed rooms, just like we hear about the TPP closed room where you can see the documents. Those documents won't be even coming to closed rooms in European countries anymore. If European officials want to see those documents now, they have to go to Brussels. They can't even see them in their own countries anymore. This next link, the pork exporters, that was actually another story about TPP and the fight for and interest in market access for corporate agribusiness. That should be in the TPP section. Next slide. Uruguay has committed to pull out of TISA, and this is in response to a measure that would say that any industry that is deregulated, what's called a ratchet clause. Ratchet clause in a trade agreement means a country cannot reintroduce a particular trade barrier that it had previously and unilaterally removed in an area where it has made no commitment. In other words, the ratchet clause ensures that there is only one direction of travel in these trade deals, towards greater deregulation and greater loss of sovereignty by sovereign nations. So in protest, Uruguay is removing itself from the Trade and Services Agreement. Next slide. Did the slides just... My screen just went to the chat box. I'm not seeing the slides anymore.
Yeah, mine went to the whole chat box, Andrea. I think we're all in the chat box with no view of these slides right now.
It says the room has dropped.
Right, the room has dropped.
Yeah, my internet connection just totally died.
Okay, then let me just keep going from. You won't see the headlines, but I'll just keep telling the stories. We're almost done anyway. The European parliamentarians have voted to revise the EU seal import ban, which was challenged under the World Trade Organization. Canada and Norway challenged Europe's ban on products of seal fur as a measure against cruelty to animals. In accordance with the WTO ruling, Europe has actually expanded the ban to make it more consistent and compliant with the ruling. The WTO ruling, in an unprecedented move, actually acknowledged animal welfare as a legitimate basis for a trade for having a barrier to trade. So this is actually a rare happy ending to a WTO dispute. Meanwhile, the Nairobi WTO round coming up in November is in doubt as to whether there will be much progress. There are concerns that this round would see the TPP-ization of WTO, moving WTO from bad to even worse, but at this time it seems like there is very little agreement, and the U.S. is pushing much more in terms of TPP itself than investing its hopes in the WTO. And finally, there are moves towards fast accession of Belarus to WTO. Hasn't happened yet, but there's very strong interest in quickly bringing Belarus into the into the WTO. So I realize it's a lot of information at once. We can share those links so people can read the stories yourself. If there's a follow-up email, we can put them there. We can also put them in the chat box so people can examine them further. So thanks, everyone, for taking in all that information so quickly, and hopefully we can answer your questions in the chat box and other places. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. And I think, we've got time for a couple questions for you before we introduce Mackenzie and then wrap. I left a little extra time at the end. So if anyone has a question for Adam Weissman about all the events and links and issues that he told you about, press *6 on your phone. Make it brief. We've got room for a couple questions. Going once. Going twice. Questions for Adam. *6. Well, it looks like we've got one hand up here. All right, area code 401. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Christopher Curry in Pasco, Rhode Island. Have you heard of any movement going on to file a lawsuit to have the fast track declared unconstitutional because it bypasses the 2/3 majority vote in the Senate required of a treaty?
Okay, so most of what I have heard, and I've seen articles making this point before, but most of what we've heard in discussion on that is that the problem with bringing a suit like that will be with regard to being able to establish standing. So until people come up with a strategy that would successfully bring a case where standing could be established, it's going to be very, very tricky to bring that kind of suit. But we can certainly, it's definitely a question that people have asked before. And Kevin Zeiss, who is an attorney, has talked to us about this a little bit. Another good person who can give you more information about the legal aspects of that question is Lori Wallach at Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, who is an international trade attorney. But what we've been hearing is that the challenge will be in establishing standing, meaning being able to show that you have should to the satisfaction of the course that any party is an aggrieved party that has an interest in the case.
Thank you so much, Adam. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mackenzie Wilkins of Popular Resistance. It looks like Andrea may have the slides working again. I see them moving. Does anyone else see them moving on their screen? Or is it just me? It looks like Andrea's moving through the slides. So Mackenzie, we'll be getting to you in just a minute, but if you want to jump in, are you off mute? Mackenzie, are you with us? Okay, I'm going to, Mackenzie, press *6 on your phone so I can unmute your mic. If you're still with us, Mackenzie, just press *6 on your phone and I will unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Yourself. All
right, great. Great.
I love when a plan comes together. Go ahead. Fill us in.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, I don't want to take up too much time here. I know it's getting kind of late. So I just wanted to thank you, everyone, of course, for all of the speakers. Really amazing today, so I really appreciate that and all of the work that you're doing. Yeah, thanks for everyone for being on the call. So I just wanted to say a couple things about what's happening upcoming this fall, and then about our calls for organizing. So as Bernadette mentioned and described in great detail, U.S. imperialism in the Philippines has been going on for a long time, and now with the TPP on the table, the United States wants to change the constitution of the Philippines so that foreign companies are able to own a greater percentage of land in the Philippines in the Constitution, which would allow the Philippines to join the TPP. This fall, on November 16th and 17th, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, all of those countries that Bernadette mentioned, will be meeting in the Philippines, and all of the United States U.S. trade reps and bureaucrats will be at those meetings. And one of the goals, of course, of those meetings for the U.S. bureaucrats will be to push the TPP and this constitutional shift. So at that same time, in Washington, D.C., we're organizing for big actions, national actions against the TPP and the other trade deals that are on the table, the TTIP and the TISA. So if you are, especially in the eastern part of this country, Mississippi eastwards, it would be awesome if you can try to make it to Washington, D.C. from November 14th through 18th. The 14th and 15th will be training days. There will be speakers and panels and all that kind of stuff. 16th, 17th, 18th are days of action. There's going to be a lot going on in those days, so it's going to be really fun. Before that, leading up to that, and something that everyone can get involved with regardless of where you live, and regardless of if you're able to kind of take some time off work and all of that, October 10th through the 17th, I don't know if anyone mentioned this on the call yet, is an International Week of Action. You can find more information about that at trade4people.org. Definitely encourage everyone to kind of take the first step, try to organize an action. If you've never done it before, it can be really fun. It's a good way to kind of reach out to people, build ties in your community. And you can put it onto the action map at trade4people.org and also at Flush the TPP. For the November actions, you can learn more at flushthetpp.org. So beyond that, of course, we're looking, the TPP is a little bit behind schedule. Of course, we never know exactly when it's going to come. So we need to start building. It's really important that we really up our efforts for organizing right now. We'll talk more. I can talk more about that on another call. But for now, definitely start organizing in your community and try to make it to Washington, D.C. Earlier this year, New Zealand had 25,000 people out in the streets. That doesn't just happen out of the blue. That happens from lots of organizing. The year prior to that, New Zealand had 10,000 people out in the streets. So we have a lot of work to do in the United States to get to those levels. We're starting this fall with October and November actions, and of course all these awesome actions that Adam talked about in New York City, and lots of other stuff that's happening as well. So to get involved with all of this stuff, you can join the organizing calls that we have. They are every other Wednesday right now.
Andrea, could you skip to that slide? It's near the end, after Adam, so people can see the phone call link.
Thank you. And this coming Wednesday is the next National TPP Resistance call. There is a kind of really good way to connect to people across the country who are organizing around the TPP, and also you can join one of the working groups. We have a working group for media mobilizers to really get the message out. The media mobilizers group, as Susie talked about earlier, is doing really amazing work. There's also an outreach group, an education group, an action group. And there's also a local and regional organizers group. On this call, we're probably going to talk a little bit also on the Wednesday call coming up. We'll probably also talk a little bit about what it looks like to organize an action for October 10th through 17th, just to kind of give some easy tips on how to organize an action. And you can learn more about that on flushthetpp.org, and you can go to the tools page, and there's a tools for action page. That will give you a lot more information on how to organize an action in your community. So I guess that's it for now, and thank you everyone again, and thanks for having me on the call.
Hey, thank you so much, Mackenzie. And we do actually have time for maybe 2 very brief questions, because I don't really have much to say in a wrap. So if someone wants to ask a question of Mackenzie or Adam or Andrea or anyone who's still on the call, press star 6 on your phone and we'll call on you. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before the top of the hour. All right, we have a hand up. It looks like Rita.
Yes, hello. Very quickly.
Who's your question for?
I would think that maybe Andrea.
Okay, go ahead.
I would just say, are you aware that in 2011, President Obama said he was going to veto that year's NDAA, and then quietly on New Year's Eve in Hawaii while he was on vacation, he signed it. So my question is about
TPP relating to...
My question is, are you perhaps being overly, I hate to use the term, but naive about expecting transparency on what is going to be going on here. Because that 2012 was terrible. It had an article, and now it is into law, and very few Americans even know it exists. It's not covered in the press.
Andrea is a veteran of the Hill, so I think she can answer that one pretty effectively for you. Andrea? Are you still
sorry about it myself.
That's okay. Yeah, fill Rita in on what you think.
Well, and again, I'm not really a fan, and I have learned to expect all manner of incredibly devious behavior from people on the Hill. So I do not expect transparency from them, and I believe things when I actually see them and not before.
Thanks, Andrea. And just, I think, Rita, for my part, if I can jump in for 10 seconds here, most of us are expecting the worst, but working and hoping and fighting for the best. And I think that's why we're all here. We all have some pretty bad feelings about what's ahead, but we're all committed to staying with the fight anyway and giving it our all. So that's my 2 cents. So,
and a good 2 was.
Thank you. So our upcoming calls, as Mackenzie noted, Popular Resistance does wonderful activism calls, has great training tools, and will help you mobilize. They do calls on Wednesdays. You can register for them at the link in front of you, which I think we just lost. And we've got a couple of upcoming calls. We do not have specific dates yet, but they will be in the very near future. We've been doing the calls just about weekly, so watch your email for an invitation. We'll be talking about UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then dates of actions for system change and justice. So stay tuned and watch for emails with details on registering for those 2 calls. We are right at the top of the hour, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. This is Elizabeth Warren with PD Action saying thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our wonderful call planning team, Harriet and Andrea and Adam and Susie, and I know I'm forgetting somebody, Linda and Jan and Mara and yes, and Mara and the entire group. And special thank you to Catherine for being with us, and Bernadette and Mackenzie. We are so grateful, and let's just stay the course, folks. We've been at this now for some of us more than 2 years, some of us for the past year, some of us longer than that. We're going to make it happen. We're going to make some kind of change happen. It may not be everything we hope for, but it's going to be something. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.